What's up, guys, and welcome back to the infamous project. Today we're going to get started on this 1993 5.0 swap project that I introduced on one of my earlier videos. So if you haven't checked that out, go back and do so, because I go over this 1993 white on blue automatic 4-cylinder hatchback that we're going to be swapping a 5.0 V8 5-speed into. So today is the day that this project is going to get started, and I'm hoping to knock this one out super quick. Ideally, I want to have this car done in 3 days. It might not be 3 consecutive days, but it's going to be 3 days of work. And I'm going to try and do my best to document everything step by step and give you guys all the information that you're going to need in order to perform this swap. Now, it seems like at the end of every year for the past 3 years now, I end up with a 4-cylinder car that I'm doing a swap on, and I've done my best to document in some of those videos, but a lot of people still ask questions to this day. And while I'm going to do my best to try and keep this all in sequence and give you guys all of that information that you need, so stay tuned, because it's going to happen. It's going to happen quick, and this car is going to have a second chance at a really nice life. First things first, guys, you need the car, the candidate that you're going to use, and you're going to want a pretty clean one. I don't think I need to go into great details about what you need to look for in terms of Foxbody. I myself and a lot of other YouTubers have done a lot of those videos. So as you can see, or if you haven't seen in that last video, this is the perfect swap candidate. Now, donor car. Donor is really important because, well, you need something that's going to donate all of its organs to provide you with everything that you need to successfully do the swap. Now, there's a couple cheap ways to do the swap, and some people would argue incorrect ways. Well, sometimes people are just on a budget. Some people won't touch the rear end. Some people won't touch the brakes. Some people won't touch the suspension. We are going to do it all. Everything that gets swapped onto this car, including the fuel lines, is going to be V8 5.0 spec. So that way, it's not that you wouldn't ever want anyone to know that the car was swapped, because we're not trying to hide anything here. It's more about just knowing that all of the parts that would have come on a V8 car are on that car. So if you come to the point where you need to modify something or upgrade something, it's just that much easier to be able to do so in the future. So if we look at this car here in front of me, this is, I believe, an 89. It's got the mass air pigtail on here that somebody's done some really shady wiring. In fact, this whole car is shady, and I said it in my last video that I was supposed to put a motor and transmission into this car, and upon closer inspection, I said, man, I'm not touching this thing. This thing is not safe for the road. It might look okay-ish on camera, but I think in the daylight you guys might be seeing a little bit more in terms of how rough it is. But let me just give you the rundown and the dirty. So when you're looking at this engine bay, you know, check this out. We know it's been hit. This has been wrinkled. This is pretty common. If you just see maybe this on one corner of a Foxbody, you know, shit happens. Maybe you're going to want to replace this inner apron at some point. But when you start looking more closely, you can see that things are compromised back here. This is all wrinkled in ways that it should not be. The frame rail down here was wrinkled and looks like it got smashed back in to try and straighten it out. You can see it's compromised down here behind these brake lines. It should not be sticking out like this. That should be nice and straight all the way back. We're wrinkled and torn on this side as well, so it wasn't just one corner. If we look down at the lower radiator support, buckled, wrinkled, cracked, split. So I'm pretty sure this car got hit really hard in the front end. Somebody maybe took a come along and tried to straighten everything out. And if we look a little bit more closely, fender to cowl, which is full of Bondo, so the hood probably flew up at some point. Look at our door gap here. And our gaps in here, this side actually isn't as bad as the other side. This is all Bondo. Door into the rear quarter. Amazingly enough, the door opens and closes really, really nice, but all the skirts are torn or have cracking paint, or there's damage, or there's Bondo, and they've painted like everything right into the car. This side is the same deal. In fact, it doesn't even latch. There we go. Door into the quarter panel. Door to fender gap is way off. Look at this. This is when you know stuff has shifted drastically. More Bondo. See, this is normal. More Bondo. So, as you can see, this car has had a better life, and now it's in a position to donate what it has, because I'm probably pretty confident that if the roof wasn't buckled, I bet you there's probably part of the subframe, and maybe down in the floor pan there's probably stuff that's buckled underneath there, because that would have been a pretty hard impact on the front of this car. And you can just see there's Bondo everywhere. So pretty unreal. Like, I think these fenders are probably kinked. Anyways, we don't need to go into it. Piece of shit, okay? This one, donating its organs and its guts. So what do we need off of this? Well, if this were a 92 or 93, I'd be taking this main engine harness. Unfortunately, it's an 89, so the engine harness isn't going to work, but I have a 92 or 93 harness for that car. So we will be using that. We'll be able to use his computer that's out of this car. So if anybody's looking for an 89 harness, that one might be up for grabs. Brake booster we would normally take to upgrade that. This one is rusty, so we're not going to use that one. We'll get a new one. So we'll swap out the brake booster. The 5-speed pedal assembly is going to come out of this car because we need to swap this car to 5-speed. The exhaust is going to come out. The spindles are going to come out so that we can have the proper 5.0 brakes, not the 4-cylinder brakes on the front of this car. And so what we're going to get going on right now is actually pulling the rear end out of here. We want the 8.8 rear end. We don't want the small one that's in here. Drive shaft out of this car, exhaust out of this car. The fuel tank, I'm going to swap out of this car. You don't need to do the fuel tank, but you do need to do the fuel lines because they run up the driver's side, or sorry, on the 5.0 cars, they run up the passenger side, versus on the 4-cylinders, they cross over from the passenger side and then ultimately come up on the driver's side. So the reason why you don't need to do the fuel pump, if you're just stock, fuel pumps are the same. But because this car's been sitting, I know that if there's even any fuel left in there, it's going to be rusty. It's going to be nasty in there. The pump did not turn on when I tried to start it. So I'm just going to swap the tanks. So today, right now, going to be jacking the back end of this car up. Going to drop the whole rear end out. And then we're going to drop the whole rear end out of this car. I'm going to swap them over because I want to keep this car a roller. So that way it's just kind of easier to move around and it's not stationary junk like this car. This car is almost ready to go to the scrap yard. And once I got it loaded up to the brim and I can get my maximum weight return, it'll get sent off. So there's going to be a couple other bits and pieces that I have not touched on, guys. Don't worry about it. We will be talking about them. Sway bar, that's another one. There's actually a sway bar in this car. So the proper 5.0 sway bar is going to get swapped over. But as we go along, I'm going to share with you guys all of these parts as we go. But for now, let's get our hands dirty, or our gloves dirty rather, and we're going to jack this guy up. Things are starting to warm up out here. Managed to switch to my hat. You can see I got a bunch of tools on the ground there. Not the most organized fashion, but I know they're the tools that I'm going to need to get the fuel tank out and to get the rear end out. So the hatch is open because we need to actually undo the tops of the shock mounts here. I'm going to leave everything together. I'm even going to leave the wheels on this diff, and literally I will wheel it up underneath into this car because he wants these wheels to be on the 4-cylinder 5.0 swap car. So that's pretty much it. Got the car up in the air here and got a piece of cardboard. I'm going to show you guys firsthand. You can do this swap in your driveway. You don't need a lift to do this. And in fact, I actually like removing diffs on the ground. They're big, they're heavy. If something happens and they fall, they don't have that far to go. So that's just some of the reasons why I'm a fan of doing it this way. And in fact, even when it comes to doing the motor stuff, like motor's going to get pulled out on the ground. So it reminds me, I need to start draining the radiator and getting things ready underneath here, because that all needs to get stripped out as well. We'll get to that later. Let's not lose focus here. Start with the rear end. We're going to start with everything in the back, and we're going to work our way forward. All right, guys. So with that said, let's get these shock mounts off the top here. Then we'll get underneath the car, start dropping the fuel tank, start dropping the diff. Look at this car. It's missing the whole grommet that goes in the hatch area to keep all the dirt and debris out. Anyways, not gonna complain about how shady this car is. Let's take this guy out. So that one keeps our filler neck intact. Undo our connector here for the fuel pump. Like that. And we got two 13mm bolts, it should be at least, holding it in. It looks like these clips are new, so I bet you the fuel filter has been done recently, which is fairly nice to see, I guess. So let's drop these two out, get our jack under the tank. All right, guys, so I had to call in another jack here. The fuel tank has a lot of fuel in it. The smart thing to do would have been to drain it, put power to the pump, just pump the fuel out of the tank into a can. However, I'm stubborn. I've done this enough times that I just kind of deal with the situation, which I'm going to do now. So we just kind of need to rotate the tank, get the filler neck out. Once the filler neck's out, then we can access the fuel lines on the top. We'll disconnect those, and we'll carefully set the tank over to the side so we don't spill fuel everywhere. Okay, we are out. Okay, so our fuel tank is out and the pump looks pretty much brand new. In fact, I could see it when the filler neck was out. Everything was nice and shiny inside, so that's a really good sign. One thing not as nice is this connector right here, which looks pretty much fried. So I believe we'll probably get this off of this car, so hopefully it's in good shape. And honestly, guys, when you're doing a swap like this, it's sort of like taking the best of all the parts that you've got, and amazingly enough, you can cross-reference a lot of things. So hopefully we'll be able to get this swapped over. We'll clean this tank up before we reinstall it, wipe it down, blow it down with some compressed air, make sure everything is clean as it can be prior to reinstallation. So for now, we get to go back underneath the car here, and we get to play with getting this rear end out. So I'm going to be popping. We've already dropped the rear shocks. All the weight is off the rear end, so that's going to make it easy for us to hopefully pop out what I believe is still factory springs, because there will be some tension on there. So get a pry bar, we're going to pop those loose, and then we're going to be disconnecting at the lower control arms and the upper control arms. Now you guys have two options. You can either disconnect them up there, or you can disconnect them here at the carrier bushings. And I usually like to opt to keep, these control arms look pretty nice and clean. Now they are the same between the 4-cylinder and the V8 cars. pick your battles. You can do it either way, depending on which ones you're going to keep. The reason why I'm going to do the control arms on the bottoms, because I'm actually going to leave the sway bar intact and literally try and keep as much together as I can to make the roll underneath the other car and installation as easy as possible. So that's what I'm going to go for. I'm going to pop these springs out, and then yeah, we'll be trying to break some bolts loose for the control arms. All right guys, we got the jack underneath the pumpkin here. That's going to take the pressure off the lower and upper control arms so we can get all the bolts passed through. One other thing that we need to do is disconnect the brake line that's going to that distribution block up there. And that is actually going to be another component to the swap that we're going to have to take into account, because this is set up differently on the 4-cylinder cars. So keep that in mind. It's not a huge deal. I'm going to show you guys how that all goes down, but we're going to take that out. Make sure you got a catch pan down on the bottom, because that is slowly and irritatedly going to keep dripping brake fluid once you disconnect that. So make sure you are in a position to pretty much get your rear end out. One other thing that I need to do is actually disconnect the emergency brake cables up at the front there, so I can get those passed through. And once those are passed through, and I know that these bolts are in a position to come out, then I'm going to undo that, and then we'll drop everything down. Otherwise, it's just going to keep dripping while we're trying to do other things. If you don't have fancy pliers, then what you do is pass a little gear clamp on, like this. Now you don't want to bottom it out, because you need some room to be able to start to pass the cable through. So just get it to the point where it's going to be able to push down all the clips like that. Just once you know you can push it through, loosen it off and pull your cable through. I'm just pulling all of the hardware off of the fuel lines that are running towards the front. So there's a bunch of random 5/16 bolts that are holding your fuel lines, and I've actually just disconnected the whole fuel filter assembly right off the rear part of the body. And there's a bunch of rivets, so we're going to drill the rivets off, and then that'll pretty much allow the fuel lines to dangle. We will have to take that, jack the front up and get that front wheel off to ultimately get the lines to pop out, and then we'll pretty much have everything stripped off this car that we need. You got everything laid out here. We got our fuel tank, springs, all the hardware for the control arms, shocks, fuel lines. Got our exhaust off, all the fuel lines front to back. And there's our tools. There's a big open hole in the diff there. Again, catching all the brake fluid that's coming out the back. Looks like it's probably done dripping now. And then here's our rear end. So now we pretty much have to do the same thing with this guy, and get the rear end out of it, get the fuel tank out of it, bolt this up in there, and get our fuel lines run. So I did take a break. Breaks are very important to take. You know, when I was younger, I'd be able to just kind of go straight through non-stop. I wouldn't eat, wouldn't do any of that. And while, yeah, I took a little bit of a break here, had to go run some errands in town. And yeah, now I can come back. I'm fully refreshed somewhat. Really could go for a beer, but I'll reward myself once I get pretty involved in here, and I feel like I've got to a good point where I can reward myself with a cold one. So pretty much same procedure, guys. Gonna jack the rear end of this car up and start ripping this stuff apart. And it's pretty much the exact same thing. We just got to pull all that shit out, and then that'll allow us to get all this stuff put back in. The exhaust, I'm probably just going to hit with a Sawzall and cut the 4-cylinder exhaust out of this thing, and that's pretty much it. So let's get cracking, get this thing in the air and done. Is in, not fully, but the control arms do have bolts through all of the associated holes, and I could put the weight of the car back down if I needed to. I don't at this stage. I just wanted to make sure that it was in there and that everything lined up. Still need to run the fuel lines, get our fuel tank up in there. The drive shaft is unbolted. We needed to do that to get the 4-cylinder rear end out. And just because we're fighting daylight now, I'm just going to start messing around the engine bay, seeing how many things I can get kind of loose and out of there real quick so I can pull that motor first thing tomorrow morning. So going to go in there and just start unzipping things. I'm really not going to care about where the bolts go or clips or anything like that, because there's really no use for any of that stuff. So it's just going to be pulling like you're at the wreckers and just, you don't care. So path of least resistance to get this motor out. All right, as you can see, the sun is down. My SD card actually filled up, so a little bit of a change. Usually it's my battery's dying or the GoPro's overheating, but I actually maxed out the footage on the SD card because, well, there was a lot of content today. So this is gonna end day one. As I said, I wanted 3 days to get the swap done. This is finishing day number one. And in summary, we got the rear end, the fuel lines, the gas tank, everything from the backside of the donor car out of that car. We got all of the rear end and the fuel lines cut and the gas tank and the rear end installed, not all the way, but mostly all the way into our 4-cylinder car here. We got a shit ton of parts laying in the back still. And as the sun was going down and I didn't want to be underneath the car working in the dark on my back, I came to the engine bay here and got most of everything ready for this motor to come out. So the fluids are drained, transmission lines are disconnected, the power steering pump is disconnected, the fuel lines are disconnected, all the AC. Amazingly enough, the AC system still was full of gas. So had to drain the system out and disconnected all the lines. All the wiring is pulled through. You can see the hole in the firewall there. So the computer was disconnected, pull all the wiring out. vacuum lines disconnected, and the motor mounts are even undone. The only thing left to do is undo the transmission mounts and deal with the drive shaft. You just need to make sure I don't want transmission fluid to end up all over my driveway. So we will pick this motor out first thing tomorrow, then pressure wash the engine bay. We will have to change the throttle cable because this is different for the 4-cylinder. We're gonna have to pull the speedo cable through and route it through that grommet there, because that's where the clutch cable comes out. For whatever reason, auto cars, they pass the speedometer cable where the clutch cable should come through. So we're gonna have to deal with that. The booster is gonna get swapped, and we will have to swap these lines here down to the proportioning valve off of the master, and that'll pretty much get everything ready. But before I get doing all that, after everything is pressure washed, I'm gonna scuff it all down, and we will be spraying it with some Seymour gloss white spray paint. So there you have it, guys. How many hours do I have in today? Started at 10, had all the donor stuff stripped by 12:30. I went and ran a bunch of my errands. I was back here at 3, and what time is it now? 6:30-ish?
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. 4 hours plus 2.5 hours, and another 8 hours. Should have this motor out, should have this bay painted up, should have the fuel lines run, and be pretty much in a position to be dumping in our new power plant, which I'm going to go over for day 2's video. So there you guys have it. Keep following along. We'll see how we make out. This thing, like I said, we're going to get this done real quick, and so far so good on day number 1.